Well, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. This is Sister Liz, and I'm here as always with Sister Elizabeth. You're listening to the In the Company of Charity podcast, and winter has arrived for anyone in the South. At the time of this recording, my brother, who lives in Florida, has gotten, I think, a couple inches of snow, which is absolutely unheard of.
It's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. I love snow, and I'm always begging. I was like, the God who loves me sends me snow wherever I go. But for places that aren't prepared, it can be really scary. Yeah. So we've got to pray for those folks for sure. And
Yes.
all of the weather tragedies that have happened and the fires in LA, and
Oh gosh,
sisters
yes.
thank God our sisters haven't been affected, but some of their employees have. So we want to make sure that we pray for those folks too, But I hate to say it, but something in the snow is fun too. It's kind of a hard thing. But we have
Yes.
frigid temperatures up here. It's like St. Louis right now is like, I don't know, 5 degrees.
Yes. Canada, come get your cold weather back.
I'll bring it to you because I love it. I mean, that's what I struggle with. I love it so much. I'm like, oh, look at the snow. I mean, that's in Florida. That's devastating. It's dangerous for those people. So
They just have
it's
to
very
wait till
hard.
it warms up. They don't have
Yeah,
anything down there.
I know.
Well, at the time of the release of this episode, I will have run a marathon. At the time of recording, we are 3 days away from me being down in South Texas to run 26.2 miles, fundraising for Proyecto Juan Diego, which is one of our missions there in South Texas on the border. And what a gift to be able to take some cold weather from here in Baltimore and have it down there. It'll be just like running here in Baltimore in the chilly weather, but yes, it'll be warming up. So we're excited. But to see some old coworkers and the sisters, of course, that are there in Harlingen, it's very exciting and a gift to be able to head back down there at this time.
Yeah, no, it is exciting. I know I always teach you about your marathons, and I think I always share. It's like my mantra is I drive my car like 5 miles or 10 miles, and it takes me like 10 minutes to get there. And I think people run this distance.
They do for fun.
I know. That's just not me. But God love you, and we'll be praying for you.
Yeah, say a prayer. I think we're definitely over $10,000, and probably I'll have an
Wow, that's
updated
wonderful. Yeah,
updated number at the next time. But
and it's so great. I mean, even when we move on from a place, when we're mission to something else, the place still holds a place in our heart, and we can still be supportive of the work. I think that's really important um, that we know the connection doesn't disappear just because we've moved on. We still hold all of these places and the people we've served there in our hearts. So that's great.
absolutely, your heart just expands. It expands
Yeah,
to
it's so
encompass every
beautiful.
new place that we go.
It's a
And
beautiful thing.
I mean, and you have some exciting things happening on your end as well, right?
Yes, yes. So, as everyone knows, as the seminary director, or novice director, as other communities would call me, my role is to, form young sisters and help them move through this beginning process. So, 5 sisters have left in the time since 2002, right? August 2002, since I came, and we'll have one more going out in February. So I'm excited about that. Sister Alicia Renee will be leaving the seminary in February and be sent on mission. We don't know where. It's always the exciting part, waiting to find out where they're going to go and what they're going to do with their lives as they leave. But it's very exciting. It's really exciting to have another new sister out in the missions, doing the work of God, serving the poor.
Yes.
It's so exciting. It really is.
Yes, it's there's as long as there are needs in the world, there will be daughters of charity to respond to them, and it's cool to see you being in that lovely line of history, which is part of what we're going to talk about this episode. Father Pat Griffin is back. He is back to drop some knowledge on us about the 400th anniversary of the Congregation of the Mission, which is our Vincentian priests and brothers, our brother community in the family of Vincent and Louise. So what a gift to be able to have him back to share some of those stories, and then also what's going on to celebrate the 400th anniversary.
What was really interesting was, the Congregation of the Mission, the Vincentian priests, are 400 years old. That's old, and like ourselves, they've continued in that time. There hasn't been big breaks, and they're not various different congregations under the charism of St. Vincent. They're the original deal, the ones who walked with Vincent and with whom Vincent formed in the very beginning, and they're the long lineage of that, which is really beautiful. In the same way that we follow our heritage, our lineage back to St. Louise and St. Vincent. What I really was fascinated by in this, and I just hope people kind of listen, is that the charism of St. Vincent de Paul is actually older than our congregation's foundations, right? And that can be a little confusing, but the spirit opening the hearts of Vincent and Louise happened long before we came into our canonical sense of existence, right? So the 400 years of their existence is actually supported by a longer heritage of a charism that the church sees as one that's important for the work and mission of the church. So that really struck me in the conversation we had, which I just appreciate him so much, and I think the end of the conversation, the episode's a little long because it's 400 years of history, so give us a break. But the end for me was, is really it builds up to this moment when we talk more about, so what does it mean today, the relevance of this charism, their lives as Vincentian priests. And in 9 years, I think, we'll be celebrating our 400 years as Daughters of Charity. So these are important times for us as Vincentians and as consecrated members of the Vincentian family. I think it's also an important beginning to start looking at the longevity of us. But so anyways, I'm so excited about it, and I can't wait for people to hear it. And I think you're really going to enjoy it.
Yes, enjoy the episode, guys, and keep in touch with us as always at companyofcharity@gmail.com. And we pray for you. We're excited to hear from you, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
And I'm Sister Elizabeth, and I'm here today with Father Pat Griffin, a friend of the podcast. He's been on many times to talk with us about scriptural issues. We had the Psalms at Advent, and we've talked about Barnabas, and he's just been a kind of a wealth of spiritual and biblical knowledge for us. But today, Father's going to talk about the congregation to which he belongs, the Congregation of the Mission, also known as the Vincentian priests. And we're going to talk about a very special event coming up in 2025, when they will be celebrating their 400th year of their foundation. And that happens on April 17th. But we also know that the charism of St. Vincent started long before that. And so Father's going to talk with us about the beginnings of the Vincentian charism. Those of you who are members of the Vincentian family, St. Vincent de Paul members, Ladies of Charity, of course, Daughters of Charity, and so many others. We know our charism began back in 1617, Congregation 1625, Daughters of Charity 1633. That, of course, is an important date for me. So, Father, get us started. What happened in Vincent's life? Tell us about the beginnings.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on once again. Having the opportunity to speak on the 400th anniversary of the charter which began the Congregation of the Mission, is really a nice thing. And it is what we're celebrating in this year, 1625. The theme for this 400th year anniversary celebration is put on the spirit of Jesus Christ. That's what the theme that holds it together is about. Let me just read you something from Vincent de Paul, which kind of helps us to move in that direction. Vincent says, "The purpose of the company is to imitate the Lord as far as possible, and taking care of poor and miserable people can imitate him." What does this mean? That it is proposed to conform to him in his behavior, actions, tasks, and finalities. How can one person represent another if he does not have the same features, the same lines, proportions, and mannerisms, and ways of looking? It is impossible, therefore, if we are proposed to resemble this divine model, and if we feel in our hearts this desire and this holy aspiration, we must strive to conform our thoughts, our works, and our intentions to his. Right from the beginning, Vincent wanted to discover more and more who Jesus was for him and the way in which Jesus was calling him to carry out his ministry. So 1625 is the year in which the charter, which founded the Congregation of the Mission, was signed by Vincent de Paul and by the de Gondis. But what gave rise to that event in 1625 really goes back to 1617, as you've suggested. I think we've heard the expression, the annus mirabilis, the wonder year. It's applied to different people in different situations. A couple of years ago, we applied it to Einstein, and in the 1 year, he made those 4 different theses that really changed the world of physics. But I think if you ask lots of people like us, if you ask what was the annus mirabilis for Vincent de Paul, it was 1617. It's really what got him thinking and moving in the different directions and the foundation of the different communities that became so important to him. So what happens in 1617? Well, a couple of years before that, in 1613, Vincent had made his way to the service of the de Gondis. And so he was brought in to be the tutor for their children and to celebrate the masses for them and to be, as it winds up, the spiritual director for Madame de Gondi. But he was doing that, and the de Gondis were, as all of us in the Vincentian family know, were fantastically wealthy and important. They were the Rockefellers of their time, and it was true on both sides of the family. It wasn't that one family was wealthy and the other family wasn't. Both husband and wife were from very influential and very wealthy families. And so they would get a priest to come work for them, and he would get what we call the benefice. And so Vincent went to work for them, and he got the benefice. And the advantage of the benefice was he could not only support himself, but he could also support his own family. So it was something that priests of that time would really look forward to. And having one with the de Gondis would be especially valuable. So Vincent gets this. But the thing is, at this point, when Vincent begins to work for the de Gondis, his life had already begun to change a little bit, where originally he was just a good priest and willing to do the ordinary stuff that a priest does, but he had begun to appreciate the goodness of God's people, and particularly the goodness of the poor. One can see the example of the ways in which he speaks about the village of Clichy and the way in which he was the pastor in the parish there. So when he comes to the Gondis, he's already beginning to think in this new direction. He's already beginning to experience his conversion. When I do talks on Vincent, I always entitle them as Converted by Life. And I really do think that's true of him. It's the experiences of life that really caused him to become the man that he was. So 1617 really points our attention to that. So what happens? At the beginning of January in 1617, Vincent is with Madame de Gondi, and he goes to one of the areas, one of her estates. And when he and she arrive there, word comes to him that there is a serf on one of her in one of her areas that wants to see Vincent. He's in Gand. So he says he really needs to see him. And so Vincent goes to him. And this man was recognized as being a very good man, but he was dying. And so he wanted to go to confession. And so he does go to confession to St. Vincent, and he speaks about things that he had never confessed before and things that were important for him to have confessed. Now, we wouldn't know that at all, except after he receives absolution from St. Vincent, he tells everybody, I was a serious sin, and if I died, I would have been condemned to hell. If it wasn't for St. Vincent, things would be very different for me. And he tells it to Madame de Gondi as well. She hears this self-condemnation from him. And then she turns to Vincent and she says to him, how can this be? There must be lots of people that are in serious situations. And then she says one of those lines that becomes famous and sometimes identified as the Vincentian question, what must be done? So she's the one that poses it. But you wonder what effect it had on Vincent himself. This man is saying that if I had not come here as a priest and carried out my ministry as a priest in the sacrament of reconciliation, this man would have been condemned for all eternity. That's a real graphic way of saying it, but that's the kind of thinking that might have gone on in his head. And he begins perhaps at that point to recognize more and more the importance of priesthood and the importance of being a confessor and to offer God's forgiveness to God's people. And so I think it really does cause him to think more seriously about his ministry. So Madame de Gondi is also, as I said, captured by this whole thing. And she says, what must be done? So she and Vincent decide to get together and to have a mission in one of the parishes there in Fauville, which is right by Gand. And they decide that they're going to do that, and they invite all of the people that are around to come there. And they have Vincent is to give a talk at this mission. And so this is January 25th, 1617, the day which is so frequently identified with our mission, with our charism. And Vincent himself identifies it with our charism several times in his own writings. So he has this opportunity to preach a mission on the sacrament of reconciliation and the need for people to be aware of how the sacrament works and how to make a general confession and to repent and change their lives. So this sermon has a fantastic effect upon all the people who are there, and all of them want to go to confession. And so lots and lots of people do, and it winds up to be too many for St. Vincent. They have to bring other people in to hear confessions. And Vincent recognizes what a powerful experience this has been, and Madame de Gondi does as well. And so they begin to use this mission idea around other places that are on Madame de Gondi's estates and the de Gondi estates in general. And so the same thing happens. People really do feel the need to make use of the sacrament of reconciliation, and they do. And so their lives are changed as a result of it. And that really makes Madame de Gondi happy. That's what she wants to do. She's a really good woman. Both of the Gondis are really good people, and they want the best for the people that work on their estates. So Vincent has this second experience then, the importance of the sacrament of reconciliation and how important it is to instruct people around the sacrament of reconciliation. So then they begin to put together groups that will go out to these different parts of the estate and give these missions and make the sacrament of reconciliation available to the peoples. And so there's more to the mission than that, but let me leave it at that for the moment and then come back to it, because I want to get to the third event of 1617. The third event in 1617 was the experience of Châtillon. That takes place in June or July. It's all in the 1 year. It's amazing. So he's there, and he's the pastor there, and one of his parishioners comes to him, this Françoise Bachet. She comes to him and she tells him that there's a family who is seriously ill. Everyone is seriously ill, and no one is able to take care of the others, and that they're in a desperate situation. And so Vincent listens to what he says, and he says, well, I have to celebrate the Mass now, and I'll do that, but I'll mention it in the Mass. And he does. And so then after the Mass, he's making his Thanksgiving, and he takes care of whatever business he needs to do. And then he gets out on the road and he starts going towards the home of this family. And on his way there, he keeps running into his own parishioners who are on their way home. And so when Vincent gets to the home of this family that had been so afflicted, he finds that there's lots of food there and the family has been taken care of. And so he looks around and he says, well, this is wonderful. But what he also sees is that there's more food there than could possibly be eaten in a finite amount of time by this family. And so a lot of it is going to go to waste. And so then he comes up with another one of those lines, which is famous in our Vincentian history. And he says, the poor suffer more from a lack of organization than they suffer from a lack of charity, which is kind of an amazing thing to say. The poor suffer more from a lack of organization than a lack of charity. So he's thinking that this family would have been better served if one family went and took care of them, and then 2 days later, another family went and helped out. And so what he begins to do is gather the people of the parish there together and talks to them about forming this kind of organization. And they do. And this becomes called the charities, all right? The group within a given parish who then help to take care of the needy persons within the parish. So the point of all this is that in that year of 1617, Vincent has these three experiences, and the three experiences begin to change him. He experiences the power and the importance of the priesthood and the way in which it's so important for them to be men who are attuned to the sacrament of reconciliation, make that available for God's people. He comes to recognize that people's needs to confess their own sin and to be taught about how to do the sacrament of reconciliation and general confessions and all that. And he comes to learn more about the poverty of people needs to be attended to. So it has both a spiritual and a physical attachment to the needs of the poor. And so those are the things that come together, and those are the things that cause Vincent to begin to have an idea of carrying out these missions. And so when he sends people on these missions, he has a particular elements that have to be kept in mind. So he wants them to do his missionaries to be preachers and to invite people to the sacraments of the Eucharist. He has the confession there to be serious about making the sacrament of reconciliation available and teaching people about how to make a good confession. He has the importance of a catechism. Vincent was absolutely, careful about insisting that people needed to be catechized. It's why it's so easy for me to talk about Vincent here at a university. When I speak about Vincent to the teachers, I speak about him as his insistence upon teaching. Vincent would say when you go to a parish somewhere, never skip the catechism every day. So have a catechism for the adults and have a catechism for the children. They need to be taught their faith. And so, one of his men writes back to him and says, I think it's more important that I preach. And Vincent says, no, catechism is essential. You've got to do that. So preaching is important, but you also have to make the catechism well known to the people that you're dealing with. And then the last thing that he does, and he has them do in the parishes that they go to, is establish the charities so that they take care of the needy people who are in the parish. So you see, and you could probably put other elements in there, but that's the way in which Vincent defines what the mission of the priest who's carrying out this responsibility for him on the parishes and the places on the estates of the De Gondis. So they have to be able to preach, they have to be able to catechize, they have to be able to confess, help the people to confess well, and they have to be able to take care of the poor there. So that's what begins to describe what it is to be a missionary. So that works for some years. Okay, he does it, but however, it doesn't work really well because it's difficult to get people that can't do this or they got to do that. They're already busy with something else. Madame de Gondi recognized that early on, so she put aside a substantial amount of money, and she also spoke to her husband, and he put aside a substantial amount of money because I guess she knew that sooner or later it was going to come to that. They would need to form a community. Vincent spoke to the Jesuits. Vincent spoke to the Oratorians. They were just too busy. They had other kind of things that were going on there, and that's what happens in 1625. Vincent comes to the realization that he has to form a community himself. And the De Gondis have already gotten the resources necessary for forming that. And so in 1625, they draw up this charter of the congregation of the mission. And that's where specific priests will be members of the congregation of the mission, and they will carry out the mission as as they are sent to do so. So it's not just a priest from here and a priest from there, but it's the congregation. That's why 1625 is the foundation of the congregation of the mission. The charism certainly got emphasized in 1617 in the famous January 25th sermon of Vincent on the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul. And so that really sets the basis for the whole thing. But it's all of those things that he learned in 1617 that become part of the charter for the mission in 1625 and the gathering together of the priests of the mission. They ask themselves, well, where are we going to live? And so, of course, Monsieur Gandhi, his brother is the Archbishop of Paris. That stuff ran in families. And so his brother is the Archbishop of Paris. And so they give him the Collège des Bons Enfants. And that becomes the first home of the congregation of the mission. And Vincent is the one who has responsibility for that. And that's where the beginning of the training of the priests of the mission and also the beginning of the training of priests under the Vincentian tutelage takes place.
Yeah, it's really amazing when I think any Vincentian who hears the story that began in 1617, you just realize what today do we know that still survived all this time and has maintained its integrity, maintained its identity and its story as our heritage. It hasn't wavered, it hasn't faltered. I mean, there's lots of groups that have come and gone, but there's a solid identity of being both people of prayer and the sacraments and the faith, as well as people of charity. In that structure, there has to be structures. So, having the money to do the things you need to do and keeping the focus on the poor. Because I'm thinking 1625, the charter of the Vincentians, but it's 1623 when St. Louise de Marillac has her Lumiere experience and begins thinking about the congregation I belong to, the Daughters of Charity. It's not going to come into existence for another 10 years from then, but Vincent's very, very busy during this time. Starting the congregation of the mission, it's only going to be about another 9 years where St. Louise will bring young women into her home and begin the Daughters of Charity. And in the midst of all this, he's also working with the Ladies of Charity, the women who are serving in the hospitals and in different places. So can you talk about, all of this is happening. So really three big confraternities, congregations are emerging in this time. How do the Vincentian priests, the congregation of the mission, find their specific way what is it, when Madame de Gondi says, what is there to do? What must be done? The question is, what must be done by the priests whose Vincent's gathering, as opposed to the wealthier women who are gathering around to help, as opposed to the village girls who will come to serve as Daughters of Charity. So can you talk a little bit about what becomes then this is the genesis of the work of the congregation? And how would you define that? And how do you see it growing throughout? 400 years is a long time to cover, but how do you see what must be done by the Vincentian priest, the member of the congregation of the mission?
I do think that it's easy enough to identify that that statement, what must be done. I mean, lots of times people associate it with Vincent himself, but it's not. It's Madame de Gondi that asks the question. And I think that that's really important in Vincent's experience. I think, and I'm going to talk a little about this later when we get into the spiritual dimensions of the 400th anniversary. Vincent listened to people and he learned from people and he allowed people to give him direction. I never would insist that Vincent was a genius. He was a good and he was a holy man. But where his real gift came from was listening to other people and learning from them and coming to understand what it is that they were saying. That was really quite an important contribution to the work that needed to be done. The thing about the mission of Vincent in those earliest years was that the priests of the mission were to be sent not to Paris or Lyon or any of the big cities, but only to the villages where the poor were. There's a in the contract, which I alluded to in 1625, this is what gets written there. Struck by the fact that the dwellers in the cities were well instructed, while the inhabitants of the country districts remained solitary and as though abandoned, we have wished to send to their assistance a few good priests of recognized zeal and piety, who shall devote themselves wholly and entirely to the salvation of the poor, going from village to village, supported from a common purse, and instructing, exhorting, and catechizing these people, urging them to a general confession, accepting no recompense, but freely distributing the gifts they have themselves liberally received from the hand of God. So he's sending these men out there to do that, and that's how the first missionaries get sent out. But then you find we call them the charities at the very beginning. The Ladies of Charity becomes that's the same group, but it's much more appropriate when you're dealing with Paris and you're dealing with ladies of royal, of noble line. The ones that he was dealing with in the parishes might have been established women, but they weren't ladies in the official sense of it. So these charities are also formed when the priests go to these parishes. One of the things that they do is they establish the charities. And so you see how the charities get established in 1617. The Congregation of the Mission gets established in 1625. And then as you speak about the Daughters of Charity in 1633. But each of them flows off the other. The Daughters of Charity come to be, in a sense, from the Ladies of Charity, in the way in which the needs that they had to serve the really poor, the ladies who were untrained to do that, the ladies of charity who were untrained to do that on their own because of their noble background. Wasn't it that they were bad ladies? They just didn't know how to do the kinds of things that one needed to do to take care of the poor and the sick. And so that's why the other women enters into it, and Marguerite Nazeau, and the way in which she's the one, again, who teaches Vincent about what really needs to be done here, because Vincent couldn't figure it out. But she says, I do this all the time. And Vincent says, oh my gosh, country ladies to take care of this work. And Louise immediately buys into the idea and takes her into her home. So it's recognizing the situations around them. And so Madame de Gondi helps to get it started. And then this Françoise Bachet with regard to the charities, and Madame de Gondi, of course, is the congregation itself, and then Marguerite Nazeau and the Ladies of Charity, the Daughters of Charity. You see how the groups get formed by paying attention to the people that are around you and the lessons that they offer. So 1625 has that, and then that's the way the congregation begins to grow. And so Vincent sends out his people that go to missions. They go to lots of the poor villages and towns, and they carry out the mission there. And it even begins to get done in foreign countries, in Morocco and Algiers and Tunisia and places like that. And some groups in Italy, some groups in Ireland. But the mission begins to get played out there. And also, like when he goes to Paris and he begins to deal with the situation there. He had said that the congregation shouldn't be working in the big cities. But what became evident to him soon, as is evident to us, is that when poor people get their farms taken away or lose their jobs or this or that, they have a tendency to immigrate towards the cities because they always figure they can find something to do there. And that's what happened in Paris, just like it happens in New York or any other big city. And so the poor also needed to be served in the cities. And that's where his connection with the Ladies of Charity and then the establishment of the Daughters of Charity really gets connected up with the foundation of hospitals and such, or the taking responsibilities for hospitals and medical care. So all of that becomes the way in which it goes forward. So when you push the congregation forward and you go 400 years, over those 400 years, the congregation has done all kinds of work in all kinds of different places, not the least of which is being a missionary congregation and going to countries where people don't know the faith and preaching Catholicism among them. Like in my own province, that would be Panama, going there and dealing with the people of Panama and helping them to deal with their faith. I mean, and going to China and other places. The congregation begins to spread out as a missionary community, and also dealing with the poor in all kinds of different situations. You can look at Vincent in his own lifetime and the way in which he dealt with orphans, and the way in which he dealt with prisoners, and the way in which he dealt with abandoned women or the elderly. And there's hardly a group that you can mention that he wasn't involved with and that he didn't bring the resources of the congregation and of the company to the service of. So that's been the story of the congregation over the past 400 years, and maybe perhaps most recently we've been also involved in higher education, although Vincent was a believer in higher education as well, with the formation of the seminaries and such. So when you come into the current era, the thing that one begins to say, well, on this 400th year anniversary, what is it that we're beginning to pay more attention to? The theme of this 400th anniversary celebration, as I said, is to put on the spirit of Jesus Christ. And so what Father Maverish has done, and what his council has done, and what the members of the congregation have done, they've looked and said, how is it that we can put on the spirit of Jesus Christ in this century, in this era, to carry out the ministry and the mission of Jesus Christ? And so they really hit upon three different ways, or lots of different ways, but three ways that we could point out maybe right away. One of them is to pay attention to the prophetic dimension of the Vincentian spirituality. The thing about a prophet, and those of us who are biblically inclined would say that a prophet is not somebody who foresees the future, but the prophet is somebody who looks at the present and sees what's going to happen in the future unless the present is changed. And so they really call people's attention to the present and what's going on here now. Sometimes that has not been true. Father Maverish would say that sometimes religious communities seems to be more in conformity with the dominant mentality of the day rather than the gospel. And so the issue becomes that we need to be more attentive to the way in which God's Spirit is at work. And so he asks himself, what prophetic traits do we see in Vincent de Paul? Where is it that he took the lesson from? And I think that the place that he says, and I think is true, is that he read the signs of God, as a prophet does, in the cries of the poor. He listened to the poor, and he heard the things that they were saying, and then he recognized that that was God speaking to him through the poor and telling him the kind of work that he needs to do. And so that's one of the things that Father Maverish would say, and the congregation would say as we begin our 400th anniversary, is what are the cries of the poor? How are we listening to them? What direction are they giving us? What do we need to change now in order to be responsive to the needs of the poor? It's not enough simply to keep doing the things that we're doing, even if they're good things. But the reality might be that in this time and place, there are other needs of the poor which are more important for us to be attentive to, or these other needs of the poor can be handled in other ways. But what are the poor saying to us right now? And how is it that we should be responding to them as prophets? Okay, we hear them and we speak out clearly about the needs of the poor and how they can be responded to. So that's one of the dimensions that we try to pay attention to as we move into this new century. A second is the synodal dimension, or the synodal dimension of our Vincentian spirituality. For Vincent, everyone is involved in the mission. So priests and brothers, seminarians, lay people. We saw the way in which He got the richest of the rich. Like the Queen and the King knew who Vincent de Paul was. The Cardinal Archbishop of Paris knew who Vincent de Paul was. All of these really, really important people knew who Vincent de Paul was, as well as the poorest of the poor knew who Vincent de Paul was. So, I mean, it's because he was talking to everybody and he listened to what everybody had to say and he allowed people to do the things that they could do. And so the rich weren't able to take care of the needs of the poor in the hospital, but they could provide the resources and they could provide the materials that we need to make the soup for the people and the clothing that they needed and that. So it wasn't that one something that was more important than the other, but that people did the thing that they were capable of doing. And so the impetus then for us as a Vincentian community moving into our next century from this anniversary is we need to learn to listen. Okay, we need to learn to listen to God. What is it that God is saying to us? We need to listen to each other. We need to listen to the poor. We need to listen to the laity. We need to listen to the church. I mean, talking about this in these years is really easy because of the fact that's where Pope Francis has been all over. We just had the synod on synodality and the ways in which dioceses are supposed to get their parishes to talk to their people, and everybody's supposed to listen to everybody else. And then by each of us listening to the others, we learn what it is that really needs to be done and where people are not um, being treated as well as they could and how people's gifts are not being used to the extent that they could be. So the idea of synodality really does play out. Within the congregation, we need to listen to people. I already suggested that with regard to Vincent listening to Madame de Gondi and then to Fouché, and then Marguerite Mazot. And then there's no doubt about the amount of influence that Louise de Marillac had upon him as she had upon him. She had upon him as he had upon her. So the synodality, it was really an important thing for Vincent. He listened to people. And so as the congregation goes forward, we need to listen to people as well. We need to listen to each other. We need to listen to the daughters. We need to listen to the other branches of the Vincentian family and see the ways in which they and you and I teach each other about what really does need to be done as we move forward. So the first thing is the prophetic dimension, listen to the cries of the poor. And the second is the synodality, listen to one another and to hear what we're saying and to learn from that. And the third is the missionary outreach, okay, the missionary element, which is so concerned with our spirituality and our charism. The mission of the congregation, of course, involves us in the evangelization of the poor. Again, when you go back to the foundational contract of the congregation, Vincent says something like this, which is similar to what I've already said. He says that the priests should devote themselves entirely and exclusively to the salvation of the poor common people, going from place to place at their own expense and carrying out the ministry that particular way. There are always to be people on the move. So they go to a particular parish and they spend a couple of months there, weeks or months there. They carry out the mission there, and then they move on. All right, because they're following the lead of the Spirit and how the poor need to be evangelized. And so it's not come and setting down roots and staying this one place. It's going from one place to the other and allowing themselves to carry out the ministry that way. Also, the fact that they would not accept any payment. So it didn't matter whether or not your parish or your ministry had the resources to pay this priest or this missionary to come to you. They came for free and they wouldn't accept payment. That's why they were supported by people like the de Gondis and other kinds of financial planning that Vincent and the others were able to do. But the thing was they were on mission. They were always supposed to be on the go and going out to where the people were and where the people's needs were and to do that. So it's not a group that is supposed to be setting down deep roots and settling here, but it's a group that's always following the movement of God's Spirit and following where God's word seems to be leading them and serving in the best way that they can in that situation. I mean, like, that's why one of the things they would say is that Vincentians are not meant to be in parishes. We do go to a parish when it's poor and they need a priest there, and the poor parish needs somebody that's going to help them out for a while, but we're not to become diocesan priests. Our ministry is to keep moving and to go to the places where we need to be. So, I mean, those are the three dimensions that are involved in Vincentian spirituality that we're supposed to pay attention to as we go forward in this anniversary year. The idea of being prophets and who we need to listen to and pay attention to the needs of the poor. The synodality, we need to pay attention to what people have to teach us and learn and listen to them and make use of the gifts that others have. And the idea of being missionaries, to be on the road.
Yeah, I like the idea that as you'd been talking about listening to the poor, listening to each other. And I think that sense of missionaries listen to everyone. And I think also looking again within the Daughters of Charity, I can see how the spirit of our congregation definitely gets its character from these years of Vincent listening and learning and allowing to grow congregations, grow institutions that needed to exist in order to continue this charism, this kind of living, breathing experience he was having, that the Holy Spirit is moving in him to widen the scope of where catechesis and where the faith is living. And I think you can see it more and more as the story goes, as you're saying, that with the Congregation of the Mission, the priests are moving from parish to parish to parish. The Daughters of Charity are moving from works to works to works. That throughout those years, I've always felt like one of the prophetic stances of a Vincentian is that all people, regardless of class structure, whoever they are, have voice. They have something to say. And remarkably, both Vincent and Louise, as you said, listened to both the very, very rich, but they also listened and worked with the very poor. And some of those poor people that they were with, these village folks, had opened to them a vocation that in this time would never have been afforded to them, especially for women, I think. Village women were not going to become nuns in a cloister, which is the only option at that time. And so some of that prophetic nature, that listening to the poor, listening to each other, and then that sense of missionary, I've always felt has been a way in which the church broadened not just who became faithful, but what the faithful did, that they were open, their vocation, their ability to answer the call was opened as much by maybe not just Vincent, but certainly through this machine, this engine that was moving through his life and the life of those who engaged with him. As you said, the de Gondis putting their material and their monetary efforts in, Louise de Marillac putting her efforts in, using her own vision to connect with him. And, as you're saying, this being the 400th, the theme of the 400th celebration, to put on this spirit of Christ, do you have a sense, or has there been conversation around who are the voices that still need to be heard? Are there voices that we can still recognize, or does the congregation in this process recognize that there are still voices that have not been heard to the capacity that's needed, or that the cries of the poor, while they're ever the same, they do take on different dimensions? And so I think is that part of the conversation as well, to broaden the sense of who are the poor we're serving, and how has that changed over the 400 years? So I'm just wondering how that kind of plays in. As you said, when the congregation of the mission is not intended to be parish priests, but it is in their parish missions that they hear the voices of the poor. And how do you think that will help the congregation in the next 400 years?
Well, I think the notion of listening is key because I think it's really a skill which is not very easily practiced in the modern world. And so um, I think lots of people feel that they are unheard. Okay, and that can be said in the church. And it's like one easily can point to the fact that women's voices are oftentimes not heard, or at least certainly not heard well. Um, but when I think about how is it that the poor are speaking to us, I ask myself things like who are the poor in the modern world? So it's you can say it's this person or that person, but I think what are the ones who are the real poor in the modern world? And I think I can say this without too much disagreement are the immigrants and the migrants. But the thing is, how often have you heard a migrant or an immigrant tell his or her story and what's going on and why they're where they are and what life is like for them? Like, we're in a different part of the world. We don't hear those kinds of people sharing what their real experiences is, and in that way giving us a hint on the ways in which we can respond to the gospel and serve them. That isn't to say that somebody isn't listening to them, but when 30% of the news stories every night deals with these people, but you never hear their voice. And it's a little difficult to think that you're listening to them other than you're hearing what somebody else is telling you that they said, or what they think they said, or what they want you to think that they said. And so it's somehow getting our ears attuned and really close to the people that have something to say. I really do think that that's where the future is. And here at the university, I think that the same thing could be said about our students. Like how easily do they find an ear to say what's going on in their lives, or how difficult this is for them. And they really are looking for people to talk to. I mean, I'd say this about lots of situations and lots of peoples, that there's a lot of loneliness going around. And so, when people don't have somebody to talk to or somebody whom they can be honest with about what's going on in their lives, then they really are the poor, and they're the ones whose needs are not being met. Because I don't know how to serve the students here unless they tell me what it is that's going on in their lives. And they don't tell me unless I make myself available to them and I sit down with them, or I'm someplace where they're comfortable. So, I mean, sometimes kids who are not even Catholic will come to the sacrament of reconciliation because they know it's a safe place, and they'll come in and they'll tell me about stuff. That's when I really feel the ministry. That's when I understand Vincent and the sacrament of reconciliation. It's not this miracle thing, and it's not because I'm better or greater than anybody else. It's just the context of it, and God's Spirit at work there, and giving one the opportunity to make another person feel comfortable, and then just listening without feeling the need to beat up or find the solution. That's where the poor are. Okay. And so, and think of it yourself. How many other situations are there that the poor are right there, and we can say they're among the poor, but how often do we actually hear them, and not just somebody else telling us what's going on in their lives?
Yeah, and that's really interesting, like you're saying, and that sense of making the space and being available to listen. And I think we all, as Vincentians, I think that's a great lesson for all of us. But also that as we reach out to those who are poor, to not allow ourselves to separate the spiritual side, the Spirit of Christ, who dwells in both us and the one we serve, and the charity, which is the kind of concrete, expression, the giving of food, or finding shelter and creating structures that help with the physical, bodily, maybe even mental health issues. I think that's sometimes hard because we get caught up in one. If I hear that you're hungry, it's easy for me to find food to give to you. But listening to the story about how did this hunger occur, where did this start? How did this happen that you came to a place where you had no food in a place where, food is so abundant? I think that's part of the important message. That's why I'm excited about this sense of this idea of being in the spirit of Christ, who never looked at people in one way or the other. He didn't see their wealth in relation to how he addressed their poverty. Even the richest, he said, give what you have and come and follow me, sell everything. Because those riches are not your riches. They actually are making you poor in some way, because you're not connected to the spirit of God and being connected in that way. So I really appreciate that. I guess this might be a personal question, maybe one about the 400th year, but also within your own vocation, your life as a priest. How has this excited that? I imagine celebrating 400 years, being part of something that is really calling the congregation to look at somewhat a revisioning, maybe, or a rededicating yourselves. What is it that excites you personally? Like, is there something within your own vocation that's, finding its spark again, or a piece of you that's saying, yeah, this is really why I've stayed all these years? Because I would imagine there has to be that. It's not just the history or the 3 points, but something that within each of you comes alive in a new way.
Yeah, when well, the Maverick planned the 3 years of the 400-year celebration. So it was 2023, 2024, and the next year, 2025. He had the first 2 years focusing more upon what he called the odd intra. How is it that we need to change our own personal spirituality, and what is it that we need to bring to it that really will cause us to be more attuned to the spirit of Christ and to the spirit of St. Vincent's following of the Christ. This last year, 2025, is supposed to be odd extra, which is to say, to see the ways in which the Vincentian charism can be more clearly expressed in the places where we are, and other people, not just ourselves, will come to understand the teachings of Vincent de Paul and the particular way in which the gospel plays out there for him. And there's a part of me that really finds that very attractive, to introduce people to Vincent de Paul, and not just by telling them the history, but to help them to come to know Christ's presence among the poor by actual experience. And so, like, one of the things that happens here is that sometimes we get our kids doing the midnight runs. Okay, the midnight run is when we put together sandwiches and things, and sometimes toothpaste and deodorant, and sometimes a clean T-shirt. So we'll put them together in bags, and we'll go out at midnight to these different areas within the city where people have real needs, and so we provide them with this. And so we try to get our kids to do it, our students to do it. Some of them have to do it because of this assignment or the other assignment, and some of them just want to see what it's like. But the thing is, when some of them go out there and they experience more than simply giving somebody a bag with some food and a T-shirt in it, but the person begins to talk to them, and they begin to share something about who they are or what's going on there. The kid's life has changed. I mean, really, they will. It's this small thing I think they'll remember for the rest of their life. When somebody says something like this to them, they'll say, "Well, I had this experience once, and it'll come out that way," or the way in which we were running low on food, and so somebody gave a bag to this particular person and didn't have anyone for the next person in line. And so the person there takes it and says, I had something to eat this morning. So he gives it to the person behind him. That's a learning experience. That's a Vincentian value that gets expressed, and it's a way of teaching. And what I'd like to discover for myself, what are the other ways in which I can help people to understand the Vincentian values, to pay attention to the parts of the gospel that speaks about the needs of the poor and who the poor are and the way in which we should treat them and the real blessing that they are for us, or to discover the ways in which I can do things in such a way and with other people that help them to recognize a particular Vincentian spin on the particular action that that I'm carrying out. I'd like to try to take advantage of making Vincent better known, and not simply by teaching the life of Vincent, which I can do, but teaching the values that undergirded Vincent's mission sense and the way in which he did that in so many different ways. And the whole thing around women and Vincent is really powerful. I mean, his whole ministry is directed by women in lots of different ways. I mean, he's just he knew where the wisdom was, and he knew where the effort was, and he knew where the reliability was, and so he makes use of those things in ways that were not realized beforehand. And so as a result of that, lots of people got fed, and lots of people got taken care of and washed, and all kinds of different things that that he showed. And so I wonder whether or not there are ways in which that is something else that I could work on better to try to lift up the ways in which women are used in the kind of ministries and the kind of efforts that I'm part of.
Yeah, that's great because I do think, sometimes we talk about our saints as kind of quiet saints. The charism is, you hear about, Benedictines and Dominicans and Franciscans, and kind of everybody seems to know what that means. And sometimes you talk about Vincentians, and they think more it's charity. It's about the giving of things. And I think you're bringing up that sense that it's about, really, Vincent is about the event. It's about the experience of being with the other, and that God is in the event. Our practice of apostolic reflection, that we can't, just as you were saying, you can't go out and have an experience with people who are homeless and they're giving food and clothing without having some experience yourself of being touched by that in one way or another. You can either be frightened by it, or you can be shocked by it. You can feel your heart leap because you want to go out and do this again, because you've just experienced a love in a way that you've not experienced. And so I think, I appreciate you talking about that. I also appreciate your mentioning, and I would encourage you to think more about the role of women, not in the feministy kind of way of thinking about it, but I think you're absolutely right that Vincent listened to women at a time when women were not listened to. And both he and Louise, I'm absolutely, just convinced that their openness is what really allowed, not just, we talk about, the Daughters of Charity being the first congregation of women outside the cloister. But I think we were also the first congregation that really saw both women of wealth, women of culture, women of education, as well as simple country girls who didn't know how to read and write, were equal in their ability to minister and be administrators, right? There was no sense that you could never be the superioress general of the Daughters of Charity if you were a poor country girl. We all had the opportunity to be somebody. We were all seen as someone and all listened to. And I think that's a really, really important part of the charism. And as the charism ages in these 400 years, for yourselves and then for ourselves too, to see those voices are still not being heard. So I really appreciate that, and would really encourage you to look at that aspect, because I think it's a hidden part of our charism, a hidden part of the impact that both Vincent and Louise had on vocations in the church. They are clearly open to people differently after Vincent and Louise than before. And sometimes it looks, when we see other women religious who say, well, Daughters of Charity are the same, we're all apostolic. And I want to say, but we're a little different. And we came out of a different model, one that really encouraged us to be and to see each other as equals. And the Vincentian priests helped us with that, so that your celebration is part of our celebration as well in the charism. Yeah, so I thank you. I don't know if there was any last thing you wanted to talk about. I know we've gone through a lot, and I really appreciate everything you talked about. But was there one other point or one other piece of this you want us to know about?
Well, maybe the thing that I was going to wander into more when you asked about who is it that needs more attention? I mean, certainly at the university, we deal a lot with the question of the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at St. John's, 40-ish% of our students are people of color. And listening to them and seeing the stuff that's going on and the kind of hearing some of the stories that they have to say, it certainly teaches me and encourages me to be much more sensitive and much more aware of the ways in which people of color are treated poorly, and the ways in which I need to be more aggressive, the ways in which I handle those kinds of things, and how I preach about it. One of the things about learning from each other, I've sometimes thought about, and I don't know that anybody, goes into this whole thing, but how much it must have been a learning for the ladies of charity and the daughters of charity, the country women and the very noble women, to get to know each other and to begin to see each other differently and begin to get a look at the other side of the tracks, and how much that really helped them to treat each other better and to think about each other with more respect. I just think it's working together, and that really helps in the doing of that. And who knows what kind of conversations they had with each other, and the learning that took place in that. So that again points to the synodality. I'm really happy to be a Vincentian as we move into this beginning of our 401st year officially as a congregation. And so I'd really like to see us learn from our experience and see new ways of making the Vincentian charism effective in a new way at this time, because Vincent was always finding new ways to express the charism, and I just think that we need to open ourselves and find those ways as well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's always a pleasure, and we always learn something, and always end up at the end of our conversations having something we'll need to talk about again later. So I'd love maybe sometime in the middle of this 401st year to talk about how you're feeling about the celebrations and where you see yourself going, and as the celebrations occur, and the kind of the challenges or the things that you've put forward for yourself. How's that going for you, and how do you see these celebrations going for the congregation? So thank you, and thank you for your life of service and your priesthood. It's really, really important to all of us, but especially your service to the Daughters of Charity as the director. I know years we all remember very fondly. So we're still reading in the seminary many of your articles that were written during that time. So so we just really appreciate your brotherly affection to us, and hope that you feel it from us as well.
I do, and thank you. And when I left here, I was at St. John's when I got assigned to the Daughters in Paris, and Father Harrington, who's the president of the university, said, "This is the job that you've been preparing for all your life." And I do think that was true, and I do think it is true. So I really learned more from working with the daughters than I was able to share with them. But I do think that our relationship is really, really important. And I thank you for inviting me to be part of this effort that you're making in spreading spirituality and good news.
Yeah, well, you'll be back on again, I hope, for sure.
Yeah, that would be great.